Hello and welcome to another video. And today's video is going to be very personal to me, but I think it will be very pertinent to many runners post marathon. Now, recently, as of making this video, I was unwell and unable to run my most recent marathon. And that sets off a whole set of mindset issues around wasted training, time, etc. But many runners that actually do their run and even achieve their goals often have a thing like a marathon post blues. They just feel down, they feel unmotivated. And this video is about how to really utilize that to get the very best from that, because it's gonna probably happen, because what goes up often has to go down. You put so many months and weeks into a marathon training, you you know hours of time probably on your own running, maybe times you don't want, but it becomes an obsession of your life. And when it's done, you have that moment of elation if you've achieved the goal that you want, but then a moment of what next? What do I do next? And so I'm just going to share some tips, some pretty obvious, some not so obvious, that I feel that could help. I've got some notes here, so forgive me if I scroll. The first and most obvious one is set a new goal. This is the most obvious one that you could do. Just get yourself in to another race, another goal, kind of feed the addiction, if you will. Now, for some runners, this doesn't scratch the itch. For me, quite often, that's not the way forward. But what I will share in a moment is something you can do with your training that kind of does a similar thing, but could be even better for your running long term. We will get to that in a moment. It's a great time also to look at the race and look at what could you do differently next time. Straight after the race, never a good time, even if something's gone to plan. As I often say to my son, when he played football, no one learns while they're winning. So if the race has gone really well, you're not even going to be that objective about how you can improve. A little while after the race, that's a great time to look at that. If the race has gone really well, is this the peak? Is this as best you can do? That can have its own dip, weirdly. If a race hasn't gone so well, in a way, it has its own motivation, because you're kind of thinking, well, I want to do better next time. But if it's gone really well, it can have that feeling of, is that the mountain? And isn't there another mountain to go to? Quite often, when you get to a little bit of time afterwards, you can analyze your run and look at it. I know that I do this with a lot of my runners. After a little while, not on the day, because either they're elated or they're deflated if it hasn't gone well. But a little while after, we do a feedback session to look at what worked, what didn't work, what could you do differently next time. Some runners want to have a race straight away. Some runners don't. Now, for those runners that don't, particularly if you're doing the classic marathons, there's a kind of marathon season. I know you can run a marathon all year round. There's that kind of cluster of marathons quite often, end of the summer, autumn, and then there's a kind of break until you get to the new year and spring. I know you can run a marathon anytime. I like to create an off season. So though I missed my marathon through illness in October, my plan had been and still is to create a kind of off season. So it's a great distraction because you haven't got any marathons booked, but it's a great time to work on your speed work on your strength work. Many marathon runners avoid strength work because their body's already under a certain amount of duress while they're training. It's a great time to look at that and perhaps build in some strength work. That's what I'm going to be doing throughout October, November, and December, working on speed primarily. I will have some longer runs, but they won't be so tiring. So I won't have so much duration on my feet. I'll be working on that speed. So when I come into the new year or end of December, where if I'm looking at a marathon in the spring, I start ramping up that mileage. As of making this video now, I have about 9 to 10 weeks that I could really concentrate on my speed work. And it gives you a good distraction from having a race. And it gives you 9 weeks or more, depending on your plans, to really build a good base of strength training, which you could still continue your strength training into your marathon, but you've built that base, you've got over perhaps the aches and pains of doing something new. So then it becomes easier to integrate into your marathon training. So creating an off season, not so much where you're off running, but you perhaps change the intensity, you change the focus, you don't have the pressure of a race, is a tremendous thing to do. It's a great way to build up also mental resilience. After the race, you can look at what worked from a mental perspective. You can then kind of watch podcasts and get tips. Now, I love a book. I'm looking because I never pronounce his name right. That Steve McNess, Do Hard Things. Great book. I put it here. Hang on. Let me grab it. Do Hard Things. It's an absolute great book. It really breaks down. It's easy to say grow mental toughness, and the trouble is, most people kind of think that they have, you know, always almost go to a boot camp. There is that aspect to it, but in this book, it breaks it down in the respect of the old way of looking at how to build up mental toughness and resilience, and the kind of the actual science behind it. And you might be surprised. I was reading in the book that things like how the army approaches mental toughness is very, very, very different from what you'd first expect, or at least the US Army does anyway. So well worth looking into. Things like audio. This is also on audio. I've got no connection with this. I'm just saying to you, that's a really good thing to do. If you're a marathon runner, usually that side always needs reinforcing. Good use of your time, either on the audio or on the actual book, or both. As I've got both. I use it. I have both, and I think it's brilliant. It's a great time to reconnect with runners. You may have been a sort of runner that you trained with someone all the time, or you might be more like me. I'm a bit of a lone wolf. I love my running club, the Bognor Regis Tone Zone Runners. Great group of people, love running with them. But I get a little bit focused on my training. I want to do the exact workouts that I have. And I find it with my runners as well that they love running at club, but sometimes the sessions aren't right. And you sort of say, I don't want to take all the fun out of your running. But, if you go to club, you got to make sure you either run hard enough or not too hard. It's that Goldilocks, sort of situation. And quite often runners, when they're meant to be doing a harder session, might run too easy, but more often than not, they go to the session and they run too hard because they're with other runners. And we know what us runners are like when we get with other runners. So post marathon, it's a great thing to do, is to get out there if you've been a bit of a lone wolf like me, reconnect with runners and have a little bit more flexibility post marathon. The other thing is an obvious one, but not so obvious from when I'm coaching runners. Take time to recover from your marathon. My coach, Liam Butterworth, puts it this way. He says it's like a battery. When you are training for a marathon, you are understandably fatigued. The training in itself is there to fatigue you. Then you do the marathon. Now, let's say, for argument's sake, when you finish that marathon, your battery, say like the phone that I'm doing this video on, let's say like a phone battery, you run down to say 10%. and you take 2 weeks off. You don't do any running or very little running, perhaps a few leg turners, and then your battery's up to say 45% or whatever it is. If you start firm training from there on, marathon training, it you would logically think, well, as I'm training, my battery's going up, but it's not, because your body then never really gets a total chance to get back up to 70, 80, perhaps higher percent. It's at 45. The best it's going to do is stay at about 45, may get to 50. But more than likely, if you start marathon training, it's going to drop back even further. That's why so often on a second training block, quite often, if runners aren't careful, they don't hit the targets they think they could hit. They don't see the improvement, or worse still, they actually see themselves getting injured or happen to get injured. So, whilst I wouldn't say that runners have to just not run at all, remember it does take 6 weeks to probably get over a marathon, probably longer. But our body does not recognize pace. It only recognizes effort. So, we look at it and go, well, we feel better. We did that marathon in that time. We're good to go. If you're not going straight into a training block, just be aware of that. I've been forced into that because I haven't been well, but I would have done it anyway. The training would have been lighter. It would have meant quicker recoveries for my body, so that when I do hit my next training block, my battery is at 70, 80%, or however high I can get it, so that when I hit that training block, I can hit the intensities I need to do. I can hit the strength training I need to do, so that I get the adaptations, I get the improvements, and the risk of injury is greatly reduced. And this is my tips, not in any order of importance, not the right ones. The right ones you'll know for you. I would say having some sort of off season where I said to my coach, maintenance, and Liam said, I don't like that word. And the reason he doesn't like it is it sort of says that you're maintaining. His view is, if done correctly, you can get some great improvements in your running, in your maintenance or off season, whilst recovering, and also perhaps doing different things, perhaps some cross training, perhaps learning different strategies, different thought patterns, perhaps taking a coach on. Now, whether this is a pitch, just bear with me. Most runners will take a coach on when they've got a race, or 2 or 3 races. And I had this recently where a runner wants to improve, obviously. They want to improve for the long term, but they have a race in 5 weeks. So immediately they're kind of go into competitive mode. That's what runners do. We all do. Oh, 5 weeks, 5 weeks, 5 weeks, 5 weeks. Puts pressure on them, and in a direct way for me, to improve. Improvement is organic. If we could just take a pill and improve, that would be it. But we don't. We need to adapt our bodies. That takes time, depending on where your start point is and where you want to get to. The bigger the gap, the longer it takes. The shorter the gap, the less time it takes. Pretty obvious, I guess. But you've got those things. So at the end of the day, taking the runners that have done really well with me recently, either by design or just by chance, have taken on coaching at a time when they haven't got a race immediately in front of them. They are, so to speak, in an off season or a maintenance mode. That enables them to improve, perhaps have a B race, even a C race. But their main races, excuse me, are a little way away. So that's well worth thinking as well. Even if, you're not thinking of having a coach, think about it like that. And I think you've got a much better chance of coming out of what you could call marathon blues, but utilizing that down feeling to the best extent you can, so that your next training block is even more successful. If you've enjoyed this video, please give us a like or subscribe to the channel so you see videos in the future. Love to hear your comments around marathon blues, if you have ever had them, and how you've managed to get over them or around them. Thanks a lot, and I'll speak to you really soon. Bye for now.